For the past 3 years, the entire AI industry has been staring at one word: compute. Nvidia, GPUs. Who grabbed how many cards? All the attention, all the money, all the headlines, piled onto the most expensive chip in the box. But the thing that actually decides this race was probably never that GPU. It's something so boring it will never trend, something you've likely never even heard the name of. High bandwidth memory, HBM. Because AI's next gigantic bill isn't coming from the GPU. If you've ever wondered why AI burns so much cash, why the AI services you use keep getting more expensive, or how a single Korean company's stock can rocket into the trillion-dollar club almost overnight, the answer isn't on the graphics card. It's in that little slab of memory stacked right next to it. On May 27, 2026, SK Hynix crossed a $1 trillion market cap for the first time. One of the key variables driving that repricing was HBM. The market is already telling you, with real money, that this memory matters far more than you assumed. And here's the thing, HBM isn't some shiny new toy that showed up with large language models. Rewind to 2013. SK Hynix and AMD co-developed it and shipped the very first generation of HBM. Back then, it was a niche part living inside high-end graphics cards and supercomputers, a market too small to shake up the memory industry's pecking order. But that quiet, ignored decade is exactly when SK Hynix banked the experience that mattered: vertical stacking through silicon vias and co-developing with the biggest customers in the world. That tab didn't come due until 10 years later. So let's break the term down. HBM, high bandwidth memory. A typical AI card uses something called GDDR memory. HBM is different. It stacks many layers of DRAM chips vertically, like building floors on top of each other, then bonds them right up against the GPU using through silicon vias and advanced packaging. And it exists to solve a problem with an actual name: the memory wall. Here's the simplest way to picture it. The processor is a high-speed factory. It does the computing. The memory is the warehouse that stores the raw materials, and the data has to travel from the warehouse to the factory before anything can be processed. The thing is, for AI workloads, the bottleneck usually isn't that the factory computes too slowly. It's that the warehouse can't supply and ship the materials fast enough. Your compute can be blazing fast, but if the data can't reach it, peak performance is just a number on a slide. That is the memory wall. What HBM does is build the warehouse right next to the factory, stacked into multiple floors, with much wider doors in and out. Shorter path, wider interface, more material moved every second. And as a bonus, better power efficiency and less space. So remember this one chain of cause and effect: the bigger the model, and the more requests it serves, the more expensive it gets to have that factory just sitting around, waiting for materials. And this is about way more than memory got faster. It rewrote the entire logic of the DRAM industry. For decades, standard memory was a classic cyclical business. Demand rises, everyone expands capacity, supply floods the market, prices crater, profits swing wildly with the cycle. HBM turned that into a high-barrier, deeply customer-locked product line, more complex processes, and a roadmap that has to march in lockstep with the GPU's release and qualification schedule. So the dominoes start to fall. The memory maker's revenue mix changes. The industry ranking changes. Capital markets reprice them. The trillion-dollar club is the receipt. The balance of power across the entire AI supply chain shifts. And then even export controls between major powers come bearing down on it. One small chip, pulling the strings of an entire industry. How fierce is the demand? According to TrendForce, HBM demand grew more than 130% year over year in 2025, and it's forecast to grow another 70+% in 2026. And this isn't just me being dramatic. The semiconductor research firm SemiAnalysis estimates that by 2026, memory spending could account for roughly 30% of hyperscalers' AI data center capital expenditure. 30%. Which means a growing share of the money AI burns isn't going into computing faster, it's going into the road between the warehouse and the factory, into feeding the compute. The center of gravity is quietly sliding off the GPU. So who's actually sitting at this table? Today, it is wildly concentrated. 3 companies. In the first quarter of 2026, SK Hynix held roughly 58% of the global HBM market, with Samsung and Micron each around 21%. These 3 didn't line up at the same starting block and fire the gun together. SK Hynix is the first mover. It bet on HBM earliest, and in the HBM3 and HBM3E era, it converted a decade of groundwork into scale, mass-producing 8-layer HBM3E in March 2024, then being first to 12-layer that September. Its MR-MUF packaging tamed the heat and warping problems of tall stacks. The first mover dividend? It ate the biggest slice. Samsung is the complicated one. It is absolutely not a latecomer. It mass-produced HBM2 back in 2016, and it has it all: DRAM, advanced packaging, logic chips, and a foundry. But broad capability doesn't automatically mean fast customer adoption. In the HBM3E era, its packaging route and its qualification timeline fell behind. It wasn't until February 2026 when it announced mass production and shipment of HBM4 on a 4-nanometer logic-based die. Whether it truly catches up is still an open question. And Micron is the latecomer that switched gears. Early on, it had no real scale advantage. But once AI demand took off, it concentrated resources on the higher generations, leaning hard into process efficiency and low power, aimed straight at data center customers obsessed with operating costs. It mass-produced HBM3E in February 2024, and its 24-gigabyte, 8-layer part went into Nvidia's H200. By the first quarter of 2026, its share had pulled even with Samsung. Put all 3 roads together and they tell you one thing. The edge in HBM doesn't come only from shipping a generation earlier. It comes from assembling the technology, the capacity, the packaging, and the customer ecosystem all at the right moment. And the real overtaking tends to happen in that narrow window when a product generation flips and platforms repick their suppliers. So where are the Chinese players? In 2024, the U.S. tightened high-end semiconductor export controls even further, and that wall is both a challenge and a forcing function. CXMT plans to start HBM back-end packaging production by the end of 2026, while Yuanjian Jikun mass-produced HBM2E back in 2023 and has been supplying domestic AI inference chip customers, with its HBM3 and 3E already sampling and entering small batch verification. And the hardest part of HBM isn't making a chip, it's closing the full loop: research and development, to packaging, to testing, to customer qualification, to stable mass production.